afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Jocelyn Simitowski. I am the director of the Center for Christian Jewish Learning at Boston College and one of the co-hosts for this gathering of the International Council of Christians and Jews, and I'm so glad to welcome you all here.
Tzorayim Tovim, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Rabbi Or Rose, and I'm doing this road show with my friend here, Dan. Welcome. It is especially meaningful to us to have you here in Boston, knowing that over the last 3 years, the world has been turned upside down, and we can no longer take for granted simply being together. Hinei ma tov u'ma-na'im, shevet achim ve'achayot biyachad. How good and pleasant it is for all of us to actually be sitting together in one space to engage in what we know is urgent conversation, the sharing of best practices, and hopefully renewed attempts at healing our beautiful but broken world.
So with that, we are very glad to have some of the representatives of the various institutions who are the sponsors and hosts of this event to come to the podium. And first, I'd like to call up Lilian Apotheker, the president of the International Council of Christians and Jews.
Thank you, Dan. This is the first time that my German-sounded family name is pronounced with a French accent. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, it's a distinct privilege for me as president of the International Council of Christians and Jews to welcome you and to say a few opening remarks. This is our first international in-person conference since the COVID pandemic, and we chose to hold it in the United States, where we have one of our strongest and best academically resourced member organizations, the CCJR. We knew we could draw on your expertise and competence for this important conference. I would like to express my gratitude to the CCJR for your support, and in particular our local partners for this conference, Boston College and Hebrew College, and conference chairs, Reverend Daniel Jocelyn, now should I say it French, Polish, German? Siemiatkowski and Rabbi Or Rose for their endless energy, their support, never sparing effort or time to turn this conference in the rich learning experience that we hope it will be for us all. With its 36 member organizations scattered on all continents, many of whom have traveled a long way to attend this event, ICCJ presents a unique voice in the world of interfaith dialogue. Jews and Christians, and also Muslims in our very own International Abrahamic Forum, and in some national councils, engage in deep dialogue that seeks common ground when possible, but never avoids necessary, difficult, deep-going conversations, exploring our differences in an attempt to elaborate new theologies that consider each other's religious experience and faith as a source for mutual esteem. Every single one of our member organizations does remarkable work in sometimes difficult contexts, complex local contexts, But together, we are much stronger than the sum of our parts, and we can realize substantial achievements. Allow me to cite just one significant example of this. This year marks 60 years of Julie Zach's passing, a pioneer in our work. It took 20 years after its publication for Julie Zach's groundbreaking Jésus and Israel, a book that was foundational for our work and whose major points gained traction at the Seelisberg conference, now 76 years ago. It took 20 years for this book to be translated into English and thus gain a much wider audience. It largely happened due to Claire Huchet Bishop, the first French president of ICCJ, who navigated both American and French culture with great ease. This is what an international organization can achieve. And sometimes it's good to have a French president. With this in mind, please seize the opportunity during breaks and workshops to engage with one another. We have all so much to gain from being here together. Once again, allow me to thank our partners and sponsors for this conference, my colleagues on the planning committee, and our General Secretary, Annette Adelman, who will be very tired when this is over and when we start planning next year's event. Wishing you all a great learning experience and enjoyable conversations. Thank you.
It is a pleasure to be with you this evening. I am Kevin Spicer, priest of the Congregation of Holy Cross, Dean of Arts and Sciences and Professor of History at Stonehill College, and Chair of the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations, or CCJR for short. I welcome you to Boston. My hometown is Washington, D.C., but I have lived in northeastern Massachusetts, a town about 28 miles south of Boston, over 30 years. While I know that the meeting devotes time to explore specific sites around Boston, I hope that you can spend a few extra days to see our historic city, especially the city's Freedom Trail, and enjoy some of the local cuisine. The CCJR is an association of centers and institutions in the United States and Canada devoted to enhancing mutual understanding between Jews and Christians. It is dedicated to research, publication, educational programming, and interreligious dialogue that respect the religious integrity and self-understanding of the various strands of the Jewish and Christian traditions. As its name suggests, the Council serves as a network for the sharing of information, research, and resources among academic and educational organizations. While most of these centers or institutes are in North America, there are also affiliate members from overseas. Representatives from major Christian and Jewish agencies and religious bodies in the United States are also members. And most importantly, the CCJR is the national member organization for the United States to the International Council of Christian and Jews. The CCJR sponsors an academic journal, Studies in Christian-Jewish Relations, which is published annually by the Center for Christian-Jewish Learning at Boston College. The journal publishes peer-reviewed scholarship on the history, theology, and contemporary realities of Jewish-Christian relations and reviews new material in the field. The journal also provides a vehicle for exchange of information, cooperation, and mutual enrichment in the field of Christian-Jewish studies and relations. Currently, Dr. Ruth Langer of Boston College and I co-edit the journal. We encourage you to consider the journal as a venue for your scholarly endeavors. I would now like to introduce you to our CCJR leadership team and invite the individuals in attendance to stand as I introduce you. Adam Gregerman. Adam is the CCJR's vice chair, a professor in the Department of Theology and Religious Studies at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and associate director of the Institute for Jewish-Christian Relations at the university. Thank you, Adam. Dr. Rebecca Carter-Chand. Rebecca is an at-large CCJR board member, director of the programs on ethics, religion, and the Holocaust at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and the CCJR's representative on the planning committee for this year's meeting. I am grateful for Rebecca's work on the planning committee. Thank you, Rebecca. Due to previous commitments, Dr. Bonnie Shafran, the CCJR Secretary-Treasurer and Emerita Director of the Luck Center for Catholic Jewish Studies at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology in Franklin, Wisconsin, and Dr. Ruth Sandberg, CCJR at-large board member, and the Leonard and Ethel Landau Professor of Rabbinics and founding director of the Center for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights at Gratz College in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, unfortunately could not join us today, but do send everyone their greetings and best wishes. Let me too wish each of you a most productive conference and an enjoyable time in Boston. It is a pleasure to have the ICCJ meeting and each of you here in Boston. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Sharon Cohen Anisfeld, the president of Hebrew College, and I'm so delighted to be here this afternoon and for the next couple of days with you. We're honored to be partnering on this conference, and I'm so grateful to all of the organizers and wanted to say a special word of gratitude to Rabbi Or Rose, the director of our Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership at Hebrew College, who has really been leading the way as interreligious engagement has become more and more central to our mission of reimagining Jewish learning and leadership for an interconnected world. So just a few reflections. I have been preoccupied lately with an essay by Hannah Arendt, a 1959 essay called Humanity in Dark Times. I don't know why I've been preoccupied with that, but, and in it she writes that the world lies between people, and she expresses concern that more and more people have retreated from the world and their obligations in it. And she notes that with each such retreat, an almost demonstrable loss takes place. What is lost is the specific and irreplaceable in-between, which should have formed between an individual and their fellow human beings. This conference, I think, reflects the inspiring work of so many who have not retreated from, but have committed themselves to caring for the world that lies between us, even across sometimes challenging differences and divides. It feels auspicious that tomorrow across this country we celebrate Juneteenth, which carries within it a powerful reminder of the life-denying brutality that is allowed to flourish when we retreat from our obligations to the world, and of the life-giving possibilities that emerge when we embrace our responsibilities to and for each other. Tomorrow also happens to mark the beginning of a new Hebrew month, the month of Tammuz, during which we enter a season on the Jewish sacred calendar which reminds us all too darkly of what happens when the world between us comes apart at the seams, when we turn away from rather than toward each other and allow indifference, intolerance, and often violence to grow and fill the spaces between us. The ancient account of how the new month, Rosh Chodesh, was marked began in Jerusalem when two witnesses would come before the Beit Din, come before the court, and say that they had seen the first sliver of moon. And when their testimony was verified, a fire would be lit and a signal sent from mountaintop to mountaintop, from Jerusalem all the way to Babylonia. There's a teaching in the Talmud in Masechet Tamid that says, Ezehu chacham, who is wise, haro'eh et hanolad, the one who sees literally what is being born. And nolad, the word nolad means a newborn. It also is the term for that first sliver of moon that we see in the sky. And that teaching is often understood to mean who is wise, one who anticipates the consequences of their actions. I've decided at this point in my life that I think that reading is, as we say in Yiddish, Narishkeit, is nonsense. Because if we've learned anything over the last few years, and we know this, we really, really never know what is around the bend. But what we're seeing when we're holding a newborn in our arms, or when we see the sliver of moon in the sky, it's not the future, it's not the outcomes, it's not any kind of certainty about what will be, but what we're seeing is possibility. And we're invited to notice and tend to those possibilities. So with that, I just wanted to close with the words of Reverend Victoria Safford from an essay called The Small Work in the Great Work, which feels like a wonderful tagline for religious leadership, the small work in the great work. She writes, "Our mission is to plant ourselves at the gates of hope, not the prudent gates of optimism, which are somewhat narrower, nor the stalwart, boring gates of common sense, nor the strident gates of self-righteousness, which creak on shrill and angry hinges. People cannot hear us there. They cannot pass through. Nor the cheerful, flimsy garden gate of everything is going to be all right, but a different, sometimes lonely place, the place of truth-telling about your own soul, first of all, and its condition, the place of resistance and defiance, the piece of ground from which you see the world, both as it is and as it could be. And we stand there beckoning and calling, telling people what we are seeking, asking people what they see." Again, I'm so grateful to all of the organizers of this week's conference. May it inspire all of us to renew our commitments to bringing loving attention and daily care to the world that lies between us.
I'm Father Greg Kulsher. I'm the Dean of the Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences at Boston College, and it's my pleasure to join the previous speakers in welcoming you all to this conference. It's a great privilege, I think, for the Center for Christian Jewish Learning at BC to be partnering with Hebrew College and the CCJR to be sponsoring this important conference, and it's great to have you all here in Boston. Many of you may know that since the time of the Second Vatican Council, a series of popes have really encouraged the Society of Jesus to make interreligious dialogue one of its apostolic priorities. And in an important way, in 1995 at the 34th General Congregation, Jesuits from around the world gathered and issued a decree on our mission and interreligious dialogue. And the decree begins by noting the great religious diversity in the world, and then says this: what meaning and what opportunity does this rich ethnic, cultural, and religious pluralism that characterizes God's world today have for our lives and for our mission? And how do we respond to the racism, cultural prejudice, religious fundamentalism, and intolerance that mark so much of today's world? That question from nearly 30 years ago, I think, resonates still today. And the Society of Jesus took up the mission of interreligious dialogue in a special way, flowing out of that general congregation, and noted that the kind of dialogue and cooperation and work together for peace, justice, and harmony, human rights, and respect for all of God's creation is done especially through dialogue. Dialogue with those who are inspired by religious commitment or who share a sense of transcendence that opens them to universal values. So since that time, it's been very clear that interreligious dialogue is a central element of the Jesuit mission, and I think the Center for Christian Jewish Learning at BC is an important way in which Boston College as a Jesuit institution lives that out. One other statement from that decree from 1995 that resonates, I think, is the statement, the affirmation that to be religious today is to be interreligious, in the sense that a positive relationship with believers of other faiths in respect in a world of religious pluralism is really central. So again, I'm grateful that BC is part of this important event, and I join everybody in welcoming you and wish you well in this conversation. May it be fruitful. May it be a time of deep learning that bears great fruit. Welcome and thank you.
At this time, it's my honor and privilege to introduce one of my friends and mentors, the Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond, co-founder and pastor of Bethel AME Church in Boston, Massachusetts. And I want to take this occasion, Ray, to thank you and your wife, Gloria, one of my sheroes, for all of the work that you've done over decades, modeling how partnership can lead to new possibilities. So thank you for being here, and we welcome your words.
Good afternoon. Now, you're not all from New England, so I know you can be a little friendlier than that. Let's try that again. Good afternoon.
Amidst the grandeur of beautiful alpine
music
lakes,
to my ears. I
the
come from
town
a
of
very
Seelisberg
interactive
lies
tradition.
at the heart of Switzerland.
Oh, you know what?
On one of its mountain meadows,
Sorry. Yeah. Use that microphone. Use this mic? Okay, great. Oh, just stand here.
Yes, yes.
I just... There we go. Okay. I just turned the video on by accident there when I laid my iPad down. It is such a privilege to be here with all of you. It is great. There's not much that would get me out. Oh, it's still not coming through clearly? All right, I'll use my preaching voice then. That's right. Not much that would get me out on Father's Day. But this subject and my good friend Orr Rose succeeded in doing that. I'm also really grateful to have here with me as members of our fellowship, our congregation, Carl Racine, a good friend and brother who teaches our Jewish Roots of Christianity church school for 3 or 4 years. It's been a wonderful journey for our congregation. His wife Susan, who does our ecological justice work. And this deepens my disappointment because I will have to leave a little earlier than I'd planned. I'm waiting to hear from a family that suffered a sudden death, and we're just going to try to see what we can do to help them through this season. But before we have a moment, just a brief moment of meditation and invocation, I'm going to ask if you could just take a moment. If there's anybody beside you or in front or in back of you that you don't know, would you just introduce yourself to them and welcome them to this conference? Okay. All right. I'm going to leave that alone. Just don't touch that. That's right. Fantastic. And I pray that that spirit of connection and community will really continue to thrive through the course of this conference. They've allowed me to come back now to the big podium if I promise not to touch anything, so here I am. Could we take a moment, and again, in whatever way feels comfortable to you, if you want to take hands or just bump elbows or fist bump, could you connect up with the person next to you as we just take a moment to offer this meditation, this invocation? Oh God, in a season of post-pandemic Sturm und Drang, of storm and stress, we gather to consider together negotiating multiple identities, implications for interreligious relations. Even as we meet and speak, walls are built and conflicts rage between family members, neighbors, congregants, congregations, urban and rural, immigrant and native-born, blue states and red states. Ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. We find ourselves polarized and divided. In this season, when races and regions and religions and genders and gender identities and nations and human creatures war with the creation itself, we celebrate the International Council of Christians and Jews, the Center for Christian Jewish Learning at Boston College, the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning, the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations, the many supporting partners, and Orr Rose and Marilyn Stern. We thank them for being irrational enough and thoroughly deluded by faith enough to convene us in the hopes that our discussions, our dialogues, our relationships, initiated and renewed over these 4 days, may play some role, spark some flame, inspire some hope, change some reality, and advance the cause of justice and peace. God, in so short a time, do we really have more than a snowball's chance in hell of even beginning to crack the code of intersectionality between religion, race, and ethnic identity? Can we honestly and transparently explore the relation of anti-Semitism to other forms of oppression? Or fully fathom how a prophet named Howard Thurman speaks to our current condition and confusion? Are there old and new bases for collaborations that move the needle? And can we, in our workshop gatherings, get beyond the platitudes and get to the heart of our hopes and our fears, our anger and our angst? Can we speak authentically, listen empathetically, find the right balance between humility and boldness, and encounter some genuinely transforming moments and people? Will anything that we do or say here substantively restore the dignity of the despised, or change the complex power dynamics that play out around us and between us every moment of every day? And you know what, God? We have no answers to these questions. Better minds than ours will wrestle with them in the days to come, but I cannot help but hope and pray that we will make genuine progress in addressing the issues of dignity and power. May the work of so many gathered in this conference and the writing and ruminations of Donna Hicks and Pablo Gilbert light our path to addressing the indignities and the powerlessness so many face in so many ways. May we find courage to answer the question, how do we affirm and enhance the dignity of others and ourselves? And how much power are we willing to surrender, receive, build together, and share, so that we make the dignity of all not just an attribute, but an experience in daily living? God, you know what? I'm not trying to put flies in the ointment, but I hope and pray that we can unravel the intersection of dignity and power in tension with one another, in balance with one another, in a complementary and complicated dance. I'm praying that we might avoid finding ourselves in the hard place between the truths that dignity is not a substitute for the sharing of power, and the sharing of power without a recognition of the other's dignity is a recipe for conflict. Lord, how will we make our otherness a cause for celebration and not a blinder to our sameness? How can we be at peace with our interdependence in a shrinking world? God, I don't know the answers. But I do know that the pursuit of those answers is necessary, and I am grateful for all these, my sisters and brothers, who share this sense of necessity and this hope for possibility. And now, God, take whatever we bring and multiply it as you multiplied a widow's oil at the request of your prophet Elisha, and as you multiplied fishes and loaves at the request of the one I call your son, Jesus. Feed us, and then use us to feed all who hunger and thirst for righteousness and justice. Amen.
Hello, my name is Delvin Case. I'm a professor of music at Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts, and a member of Old South Church here in Boston. I'm very, very happy to be welcomed by you and or Rose and the many people who have organized this event to offer sort of a special and unique contribution to the event right now. You're going to hear over the next hour, but they're not. You're going to hear over the next hour or 45 minutes, 2 short pieces for violin that were created under the auspices of an organization that I founded 3 or 4 years ago called Deus Ex Musica. Our goal is to use contemporary music to create opportunities for ecumenical and interfaith dialogue. And we do this by bringing together composers and musicians who represent various Jewish and Christian traditions to create new pieces of music in response to the Bible, our shared tradition. We record and perform these pieces, and then, most excitingly, we share them in live events in which we use these live performances as a springboard for discussion about the ways Scripture helps us to understand our faith. And by creating this affective environment, this subjective environment for lay people, scholars, teachers, preachers, etc., to engage with Scripture, we've seen this again and again lead to deep listening, honest learning, and increased respect for the ways that we all view our God and our sacred scriptures. So you're going to hear two short pieces during this event. The first one's going to happen in just a moment. It's a musical response for violin to Psalm 133, at least in my tradition, it's 133. And Orr actually quoted it briefly. It's the shortest psalm in the Bible, so I'm not going to read all of it, but you may know it. I understand that it's a well-known Friday night song as well. But it's the one that says, "Behold, how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garments." This piece is actually my contribution to a recent CD recording of these 10 pieces by Jewish and Christian composers. And it's an attempt to capture the joy and the possibility of this short text. It doesn't capture the joy in sort of a sparkly, we've done it kind of thing. Instead, it's a more sober, measured response to the possibility of this kind of unity and brotherhood and sisterhood. And so it represents a degree of effort and even struggle that will hopefully get us there. Now, to perform this short piece, I'm going to introduce Yonah Zor, who is going to play it right over here. Yonah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that amazing and moving performance. We've now moved to the portion of the program where we have the granting of the Seelisberg Prize, and that begins with a video, but I'm not going to do it.
Nestled amidst the grandeur of beautiful alpine lakes, the town of Seelisberg lies at the heart of Switzerland. On one of its mountain meadows, according to tradition, the rulers of 3 neighboring districts swore an oath of confederation in 1307 that became the forerunner of the modern Swiss nation. In August of 1947, in Seelisberg's Grand Hotel Sonnenberg, occurred a historic week-long gathering of 63 Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. This conference would have an enormous positive impact on the relationship between Jews and Christians. One participant, French historian Jules Isaac, presented 18 theses that summarized his book, Jesus and Israel, and the history of the Christian teaching of contempt for Jews and Judaism. At the conclusion of its discussions, the Seelisberg Conference issued a landmark statement, a call to the churches, the 10 points of Seelisberg, which drew extensively on Isaac's work. The Seelisberg statement provided the basis for many later official texts from across the Christian world, perhaps most notably the 1965 declaration Nostra Aetate from the Second Vatican Council of the Catholic Church. The Seelisberg Conference also gave birth to the International Council of Christians and Jews, whose offices today are located in the home of the famous Jewish philosopher Martin Buber in Heppenheim, Germany. The 1947 Seelisberg Conference is rightly celebrated as a milestone in interfaith relations. Nestled amidst the grandeur of beautiful alpine lakes,
We're getting there. Thank you so much, Ben. And now I'd like to call up Dr. Amy Jo Levine of Hartford International University to offer the laudation for the Seelisberg Prize.
Thank you. I feel like I should begin nestled among the grandeur, but... Hello, Joseph. Reverend Dr. Joseph Sievers, Father Joseph, has shared with me a draft of his remarks for today, and he, better than I, can detail how he came to be working in the vineyards of Jewish-Christian relations. Therefore, I'll first share a few highlights of his career, and then I'll turn to reflect less on Joseph Sievers, the professor, and more on Joseph Sievers, the mensch. So the academic details. From 1966 to 1971, he was at the University of Vienna, the Universität Wien, where his Dissertationsprüfung, how was that? I've been practicing my German, it's still pretty not good, was in Jewish studies. From 72 to 81, he was at Columbia University in New York, where he earned an MA, and if that wasn't enough, an MPhil, and then he got a PhD in ancient history and Jewish studies. And were those degrees not enough, he also earned a Bachelor of Theology at the Pontifical Lateran University, a Licentia in Fundamental Theology, that's an STL for those of you who know, from the Pontifical Gregorian University. He's also worked in religious studies in Florence. He did modern Hebrew at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He took courses in Talmud at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and he was also an elected visiting scholar at Wolfson College, Oxford University. And there's some other stuff, but that's pretty good to start. In terms of his teaching, Joseph Seevers is Professor Emeritus of Jewish History and Literature of the Hellenistic period at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome, the Biblicum, where he began teaching in 1991. He's also taught at the Pontifical Institute Ratisbon in Jerusalem, at Fordham University in New York, at Queensborough Community College in New York, at Queens College in New York, and then going a bit south at Seton Hall in New Jersey, and in Rome at the Pontifical Lateran University and the I can't even pronounce this stuff, but there were a bunch of schools in Italy where he taught as well. And were I to attempt to pronounce them, it would be embarrassing for us all. Moving on. For advancing Jewish-Catholic dialogue, Joseph Seevers has since 2008 served as a consultant to the Vatican's Commission for Religious Relations with the Jews, a committee on which our colleague Gregor Maria Hoff also sits. Folks, I would like a seat on that committee if you could work it out. From 2003 to 2009, he served as the director of the Cardinal Bea Center for Judaic Studies at the Pontifical Gregorian University. His work on editorial boards includes the boards for the Journal of Jewish Studies, Revista Biblica, Studies in Christian-Jewish Relations, and the much-missed Siddiq from 1995 to 2001. He has authored numerous publications, we won't list them all, in Jewish-Christian relations and in the field of Second Temple Judaism. I want to flag a few. His interest in Pharisees was first expressed in his 1991 article, Who Were the Pharisees?, in the collection Standing Before God, edited by Asher Finkel and Larry Frizzell. The article was subsequently translated into both French and Italian, and the importance of the title, Who Were the Pharisees?, cannot be understated, because the fact is, we don't know, right? And Joseph Seevers was smart enough to recognize that you cannot just look at Matthew and you cannot just look at Josephus and know who the Pharisees are. His 1997 article, Who Were the Pharisees? In Hillel and Jesus, edited by Jim Charlesworth and Lauren Johns, was the first study to address the dozen or so named Pharisees in ancient texts. For those of you who work in New Testament, this would be people like Nicodemus and Gamaliel. And what Joseph Seevers managed to show quite correctly was not a single named Pharisee, and there are about a dozen, fits the negative stereotypes mentioned in the Gospels. And for the third, his 2017 article, Where Two or Three, Shekhinah and Matthew 18:20, Foundations for Jewish-Christian Dialogue and Beyond, published in the journal Claritas, models how rabbinic literature and New Testament studies can be placed into productive dialogue without setting one corpus as the background or the negative foil to each other. That's how this interreligious work is done. He is the co-editor of such volumes as Good and Evil After Auschwitz, Ethical Implications for Today, co-edited with Jack Bemperad and John Pawlikowski, The Catholic Church and the Jewish People, Recent Reflections from Rome, co-edited with Philip Cunningham, who is here, and Norbert Hoffman, and the excellent Christ Jesus and the Jewish People Today, New Explorations of Theological Interrelationships, whose co-editors include Phil Cunningham, Mary Boyce, Hans Hermann Hendricks, and Jesper Schwartek, and with me, The Pharisees 2021, published in both English and Italian. This last volume proceeded from the conference Jesus and the Pharisees, an interdisciplinary reappraisal that he arranged. And although he will tell you lots of other people were involved, Joseph Seevers did all the heavy lifting. And now, with Professor Jens Schroeder serving as the third editor, this volume on the Pharisees is being published with a few different articles and in a less academic, more user-friendly format in German. And as of 3 days ago, Joseph and I were offered a contract from Erdmann's Publishers here in the US to do a shorter version of the volume designed to be used principally by English-speaking clergy and religious educators, which just shows how international and important his work is. But enough of that. On Joseph Seevers, the Mensch. Joseph has been since 1965, I was 9, a member of the Focolare community, an ecumenical movement dedicated to both spiritual and social renewal, present in 182 nations and involving more than 2 million people. The goal of Focolare is to promote, quote, a more united world in which people respect and value diversity. Who would have thought? To achieve this goal, its members are, quote, committed to building bridges of fraternal, I would also add sororial, relationships among individuals and between cultural groups in every area of society. So what he's doing is what we heard in our initial reflection. This is the work that needs to be done. This dedication to diversity and to dialogue marks Joseph's life. A commitment to diversity and dialogue, however, does not mean sacrificing the particulars of belief on the altar of interreligious sensitivity. Joseph begins discussions on the solid ground of his own faith commitments. He's a Catholic priest. More, his commitments include careful scholarship. Along with being gentle and kind, he is also a detail-oriented historian who, in his gentle and kind way, tells people who have contributed essays to volume C edits where they could improve their work, where they made errors, and where their English could be clearer. That Joseph is a native German who works primarily in Italy, makes corrections for English-speaking scholars is a tad ironic. That he makes these corrections in such a kind way makes those on the receiving end, including me, feel less embarrassed. When Joseph hears or reads or sees something that runs counter to his commitments, he actually does something about it. For example, when on March 17th of this year, Pope Francis, in a homily for the celebration of reconciliation, 24 Hours of the Lord, adduced negative stereotypes about the Pharisees. The text was the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Joseph not only wrote a letter and arranged to have it delivered to him because Joseph knows people in Rome, but he also arranged to provide the Pope a copy of my volume on the parables. And we both received a signed letter from Pope Francis with some prayer cards. This was very nice. Despite the problems of travel to and travel in the United States, Joseph has done programs on the Pharisees for Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., the Jewish Theological Seminary and Fordham Law School in New York, and for St. Leo University in Tampa, Florida, where our friend Michael Tapey works. When Joseph is not changing the world by improving Jewish-Christian relations, or changing the academy by advancing knowledge of the Hasmoneans, Flavius Josephus, or the Pharisees, he is engaged in pastoral work in churches, in the classroom, with clergy and with women religious, and with friends. When my son Alexander a few years ago developed severe kidney problems, Joseph provided me the pastoral care that I needed. Alexander is now fine, and it is not impossible that Joseph's prayers had something to do with my son's good health, because he has connections. With prayer, piety, precision, and persistence, Joseph Sievers has already accomplished a number of miracles. If there are living saints or Lamedvavniks, one of the 36 hidden righteous ones for whose merit the world exists, Joseph Sievers is one. And the damn thing is that just like a Lamedvavnik, Joseph Sievers is too modest and too humble to acknowledge these points. So thank you to members of the ICCJ for awarding the Seelisberg Prize to Joseph Sievers. Congratulations, dearest Joseph, for this well-deserved honor. And would you please join me in welcoming good friends Gregor Maria and Lilian to make this presentation.
First of all, thanks a lot for this wonderful, amazing laudation, AJ. Joseph, the International Council of Christians and Jews and the Center for Intercultural Theology and Study of Religions at the University of Salzburg, in commemoration of the 1947 Emergency Conference on Anti-Semitism in Seelisberg, Switzerland, award the 2023 Seelisberg Prize to Joseph Sievers in grateful recognition of his promoting and enriching the words of Seelisberg's A Call to the Churches and its 10 points by his commitment of many decades to educating against any presentation and conception of the Christian message which would support anti-Semitism under whatever form. His extensive and impeccable research into the biblical and post-biblical history of the Jewish people and of nascent Christianity. His work often behind the scenes in organizing influential international conferences that bring academicians and clergy together to address widespread caricatures of Judaism among Christians. His dedication and calm, inspiring involvement with numerous organizations and religious communities that promote interfaith solidarity and continuously seeking to inform the daily lives of Jews and Christians by enriching their understanding of each other through dialogue and joint study. Awarded in Boston on the 18th of June 2023.
Dear representatives of the sponsoring institutions, thank you all, and thank you, Amy Jill, AJ. Well, I have no words how to thank all of you, but I've been asked to share a bit of my experience, of my involvement in Jewish-Christian relations. So I'll give you something that I can give. I won't make big stories, but will tell you small stories. But together, maybe they form something. My first conscious visual encounter with Jewish culture occurred in my hometown, Recklinghausen in West Germany, at a 1960 exhibit titled Synagoga. The term was intended both in its concrete meaning of synagogue and its etymological origin as gathering, encounter. The exhibition included archaeological and artistic objects on loan from museums and other institutions, as well as from private collections in Israel, the United States, and several European countries. It was the first such undertaking in post-war Germany and is still seen as a path-breaking event. It was held in the Municipal Art Gallery, a former air raid shelter. As you may recognize, the windows were broken in afterwards. The remains of a wooden synagogue built in 1735 and put together for this exhibit made a particular impression on this 12-year-old. A few years later, when I was about 15, I attended a summer course near Hanover. Looking at a map, I realized that the former camp of Bergen-Belsen was fewer than 25 miles away. So I decided to go there by bicycle, by myself. I did not meet anyone, but I saw the mass graves and the memorial. Perhaps you can see 5,000 people are buried in this mass grave. The visual impression and my silent reaction were deep and lasting. While in high school, I chose to take optional courses in Biblical Hebrew, then widely available in Germany, since I thought I would need Hebrew were I to study theology. That way I would avoid having to take the courses at the university. Things turned out differently. In the same period, I decided to join the Focolare movement and live in one of their communities. That I might be ordained to the Catholic priesthood remained a possibility that occurred 35 years later. The Focolare, founded by Chiara Lubich, foregrounds the aims of unity and dialogue, including interreligious dialogue. I arrived at the community in Cologne in the evening of October 28, 1965, the day on which the Second Vatican Council promulgated Nostra Aetate. I did not know what was going on at the time at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But when I learned about the conciliar document, the simultaneous character did not seem coincidental. Much of my work thereafter would revolve around the topics of ancient and modern Judaism and of Jewish-Christian relations. My superiors at Focolare suggested that I continue my studies of biblical languages. I enrolled at the University of Vienna, where in my first semester I took courses in the Dead Sea Scrolls and Aramaic. That was the only biblical language that I didn't have yet. I was privileged to study with Professor Kurt Schubert. Oops. What? Oh. One of the greatest pioneers of Jewish-Christian relations in Austria and beyond. In 2006, after over 60 years of teaching, he was honored by the ICCJ with the Sir Sigmund Sternberg Award. After an MA in Jewish Studies in Vienna, I continued at Columbia University in New York, focusing on the Second Temple period. I had hoped to write a dissertation on early Jewish-Christian relations, but in the end, I agreed with my dissertation director, Morton Smith, to do a dissertation on Hasmonean history. At the time, there was little precedent for Christians to study that period except second and first century BCE, except seen from the perspective of a preparation for Jesus and the New Testament. Thus, my experience at Columbia taught me that to have productive dialogue, we must both discern the topics to address and avoid areas where finding common ground would be impossible. But for the Hasmonean period, this was possible. While I was still a student at Columbia in 1975, Monsignor John M. Österreicher invited me to join the founding faculty of the graduate program in Jewish-Christian Studies at Seton Hall University in New Jersey, along with Father Larry Frizzell and Rabbis Asher Finkel and Herb Weiner. Monsignor Österreicher, who had been among the drafters of Nostra Aetate, transmitted to me and to many others a commitment to work for a renewed relation between Christians and Jews, or as he called it, the diaconia of reconciliation, service of reconciliation. For a while, I also taught introductory courses in ancient history at Queens College in New York. One of my students had a Viennese acquaintance, Willy Pernhal, who had survived several concentration camps before arriving in the US towards the end of World War II. This is Willie and his wife, Bernice. Mr. Pernhall, a journalist, had written various poems when still in Vienna. All his manuscripts were lost, and for many years he avoided contact with Germans and no longer wanted to speak German. But he remembered several of the poems and now wanted to recite them once to a native speaker. The student asked me if I would listen to these poems and give my opinion as to whether they could be published. I agreed. Mr. Pernhall recited his poems to me from memory for about an hour. I told him how impressed I was with his poetry's depth and authenticity. In gratitude, he invited me to a concert, and gradually a deep friendship grew between a Viennese Jew who had lost everything in the Shoah, including his faith, and a German Catholic almost 40 years younger. We met for dinner about every other month and would talk for several hours. The Shoah and his journey, which led through 6 concentration camps and then via Spain to Philadelphia and New York City, rarely came up. But he often touched on religious topics, despite his difficulties with theological belief. Once he told me that he felt that when the two of us were together, we were not alone. When I explained to him that the Mishnah speaks of the Shekinah, of the divine presence, among two who concern themselves with Torah, he became pensive, without expressing either disapproval or agreement. Our relationship grew even when I moved to Los Angeles, where I shared responsibility for the Focolare community in the Western United States. When I returned to New York on short trips, I visited him. In November 1986, when I came for a weekend, Bernice, his wife, told me that he was hospitalized and critically ill. At the first opportunity, I went to visit him. Willie was hooked up to a respirator. After a few minutes, the doctor asked me to leave the room. When she emerged from the room, she said, "He is no longer with us," and asked me to inform his wife and relatives. At his bedside, I wanted to pray, but I did not know how to say Kaddish or that a minyan is needed. I did not want to say a Christian prayer, but I have rarely prayed in silence as intensely as I did then. This last encounter with Willie seemed to me a sign of God's love for him and for me. Willie had difficulty believing in a loving God. He struggled with faith, and sometimes he called himself an atheist. But on this point, I never believed him. For the past 35 years, I have lived in Rome. Shortly after I arrived, between 1989 and 1990, thousands of immigrants from the then Soviet Union passed through Italy on their way to the US, Canada, or Australia. Processing took at least 2 months and sometimes more than a year, which meant that during that winter, over 20,000 Soviet Jews lived in the vicinity of Rome, mostly in seaside resorts that were otherwise empty during the winter. Here, this is the beach at that time, near Torva Janica. Many of these families arrived in Italy with a handwritten personal letter from a good friend from my Vienna days, asking me to be of assistance to them in any way I could. I received about 20 of those letters. So Jewish organizations such as the Joint Distribution Committee and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society did an admirable job in providing basic services for so many clients. But beyond this financial administrative assistance, many of the immigrants were eager to find opportunities for personal encounters. Once, together with a Catholic woman, I took a Jewish couple from Kharkiv, Ukraine, to a synagogue for Friday night services, where they had been invited to meet some community members. The synagogue, a former cinema, was used by a congregation of mostly Libyan Jews who conversed in Arabic after services. It was an unforgettable experience for me as a Catholic to try to explain in English the services conducted in Hebrew to people who spoke mostly Russian and did not expect to hear Arabic in the synagogue. On other occasions, especially when meeting people who knew Yiddish, we spoke in a combination of Yiddish and German. This worked also for German Catholic seminarians I asked to accompany an elderly couple to the main synagogue. When some of the immigrants asked if they could see the Pope, arrangements were made through the office of the chief rabbi and appropriate Vatican officials. We participated in a general audience on January 17th, 1990, a day that the Italian Bishops' Conference chose for deepening and developing Jewish-Christian interfaith dialogue. 30 of my Jewish friends received front row seats in the audience hall filled with about 3,000 people. Pope John Paul II addressed them in Russian and greeted many of them personally. The experience was unforgettable. I also established contact with the Joint Distribution Committee, which was trying to find facilities for running a school in a seaside resort outside of Rome, where thousands of Jews from the Soviet Union were housed that winter. I put them in touch with Catholic Charities, with the result that they received free use of their building adjacent to a parish church. For several months, the Joint provided programs and teachers for a Russian language school for Jewish students. The same parish offered its church auditorium for a Purim celebration for hundreds of people from the Soviet Union. Purim in a church, that is something unusual. Several other parishes reached out to temporary Jewish neighbors, as did individual Christian families. Such encounters, often conducted with very limited language skills, helped change perceptions of the other on both sides. On occasion, my new Jewish friends asked me to explain the meaning of Bar Mitzvah or Hanukkah or Passover. How extraordinary to be called upon to help others discover their identity and learn about that and be privileged to give that information to them. By the fall of 1990, most of the immigrants had departed for their final destinations, but some contacts have continued. I received a message this morning from a family in New Jersey that I met in those years. In the following year, 1991, I received an invitation to be a sabbatical replacement for a professor of the Pontifical Biblical Institute, better known as the Biblicum, in Rome. This later became a permanent position, a professorship in Jewish history and literature of the Hellenistic period. In my 32 years at the Biblicum, I have been able to introduce students from over 60 countries to non-biblical and biblical Jewish texts, especially the scrolls, apocalyptic literature, Josephus, and to the history of the period. My goal is to help them understand both Second Temple Judaism in its own right and the New Testament as part of this Jewish context. My research during the past years has focused on Josephus, Jewish writer who lived in Rome within a mile or so from where our institute was. He lived there a bit earlier, during the last decades of the 1st century CE. He wrote in Greek, which was not his first language, nor that of his Roman audience, but it served to communicate in ways similar to how English is used in many countries today. In both 92 and 2003, I organized international conferences on Josephus. I also participate in an international translation and commentary project of all his works. After my retirement from teaching last month, the Biblicum asks me to continue as a project manager for a related database called PACE. If anyone wants to know about it, I can tell them. It includes text, translation, commentary, bibliography, maps, photographs, and so on for Josephus and other ancient authors. In addition to teaching at the Biblicum, from 2003 until 2009, I served as director of the Cardinal Bea Center for Judaic Studies at the Gregorian University. The center was based on an initiative of Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, formerly rector of that university. My charge was to strengthen the center's function and expand its work. Building positive relationships, not only Jewish-Christian, but also inside the university, was sometimes harder. But the center managed to offer several courses each semester and to organize conferences and other events. For me, the Bea Center has also been an opportunity for enriching experiences such as developing relationships with the Hebrew University through the exchange of faculty and students and joint initiatives, among which was a conference on Paul's Jewish matrix and another one in honor of Cardinal Martini on intercession. The Brenningmeier-Wehrhahn professorships and scholarships facilitated not only academic exchanges, but also many friendships that enabled the center to face and overcome difficulties caused sometimes by external ecclesiastical and political events. With students, I participated often in Shabbat services. Once, I remember the former longtime chief rabbi of Rome, Elio Toraf, was in the congregation. He was not officiating, but the friend of Pope John Paul II. After the service, he personally greeted each student, and I think they'll remember that. And I remember that very well. We continued to do that, and even last month we did it. This is from some time ago, but we do it every semester at least once. Here, this is in the so-called Tempio Spagnolo, or Sephardic synagogue form. Working for the Bear Center was fascinating and engaging. It was also sometimes difficult, as when a new form of the Good Friday prayer was introduced, not for the general purposes, but just for the special, extraordinary rite. Here you see the announcement. You may not be able to read it, but you see it was a short note on the front page of the Osservatore Romano, and without much explanation, but with results that were very difficult. As a result of this decision, at the Bear Center, one rabbi canceled his classes. Now I think he is teaching again there, if I'm correctly informed, but this is quite a few years. We canceled some classes, at least temporarily. We could not say we don't continue, but we wanted to make sure it's not just a problem on the Jewish side, it's a problem for us as well. But anyway, it took about a year for the situation to normalize. I don't go into the details here. As part of the Bear Center's collaboration with the Holy See, Rabbi Professor Lawrence Schiffman and I drafted a text for the International Catholic Jewish Liaison Committee meeting in Cape Town in 2006, entitled Learning About Ourselves While Learning About Each Other, Proposals for Jewish and Catholic Education. It was eventually published in Studies in Christian-Jewish Relations. The text is designed in part to help various initiatives across the globe taken by Christians and Jews to revise religion and history textbooks to give the other more space, especially Judaism, Jewish history, but also Christianity, and up-to-date views of Jewish-Christian relations. Another project tried to address the questions, how might we Christians in our time reaffirm our faith, claim that Jesus Christ is the Savior of all humanity, even as we affirm Israel's covenantal life with God. Formulation, I have to credit Phil Cunningham for this, and we worked together on this project and together with others. In this project, this is an inner Christian question, but we had immediately also Jewish consultants, Jewish participants in this. Our first meeting took place in 2006 in Arica. Oops. Doesn't want to go ahead. Oh. Okay. This is Arica. Maybe you recognize some faces here, although some years have passed. This was the same venue, the same house where years before Cardinal Bear and others had met to draft Nostra Aetate. We worked for several years on diverse aspects of this topic. One memorable working session took place at Notre Dame University at the invitation of Rabbi Michael Signer. You see him on the picture in the white shirt. shortly before our meeting, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. On the spot, some of us organized a prayer service for him, which Michael and his wife Betty attended. The service was led jointly by Rabbi Ruth Langer and by Father John Pawlikowski. At that moment, interreligious dialogue took on a new dimension of spiritual depth for all of us. The work of this group resulted in the volume that you see here on the left, with essays by Catholic and Protestant authors and responses by Jewish scholars. This project spawned others with varying institutional cooperations, one on Promised Land and Hope, co-sponsored by ICCJ, that led to the other book, Enabling Dialogue About the Land, and a current one on the importance of Jesus' Jewish identity for Christians and Jews. On a different level, in 2007, the Focolare movement asked me to help organize an international conference on the topic, to be a blessing for one another and for the world, in Castel Gandolfo near Rome. A follow-up was planned for February 2009 in Jerusalem. At the time, the dust had not yet settled after Operation Cast Lead in Gaza and the lifting of the excommunication of the Holocaust-denying Bishop Richard Williamson. The temptation to call off or postpone the symposium was strong. We canceled the public session scheduled for a central Jerusalem location because of concerns raised by some of our Christian friends in Israel. In the end, we decided to go ahead. We changed the title to Walking Together in Jerusalem, indicating that we are in the middle of a complicated journey. About 80 scholars, rabbis, priests, and lay people participated. One session titled Bridges Over Troubled Waters, in which I participated with Rabbi David Rosen, discussed progress and roadblocks on this journey. A highlight was walking together to different Jewish and Christian holy sites, including the traditional sites of David's tomb and of the Last Supper. At a Christian site, only a few hundred yards from the Western Wall, we sang, "The Lord is my shepherd," Psalm 23, in both Hebrew and Arabic. A short time after the Jewish evening prayer at the Western Wall, we gathered in the plaza near the wall, just outside the area where women and men are separate, with prayers led by another rabbi and a priest. Such a relatively small gathering does not have maybe a direct impact on theological or political developments, but it does provide important signs of hope. Finally, while at the Biblicum, I often taught and wrote about the Pharisees. With help from many people and institutions, we had a conference mentioned before, titled Jesus and the Pharisees, an interdisciplinary reappraisal. Participants included Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, and other scholars from different countries specializing in ancient sources related to the Pharisees. These are most of the speakers from many different countries. Or in various areas important to the history of reception. From the church fathers to medieval authors to art, passion plays, film, teaching, and preaching. We also had a special audience with Pope Francis. The sponsors were a Jewish organization, American Jewish Committee, the Italian Bishops' Conference, Faith Life Incorporated, a company that produces the Logos Verbum biblical software packages, and others. The collection of essays resulting from the conference were published in English and Italian, and soon, hopefully, in German. The conference project, as well as the related publications, demonstrate that it is both necessary and possible to aim high in scholarly quality, to choose topics that are relevant to scholars and to a wider audience, and to find communication channels to get the results to as wide a range of people as possible. But to do this takes extensive collaboration, and I'm grateful to all the people who assisted in this and the many other projects. Of course, the work is never finished, but as the Mishnah proposes in a saying attributed to Rabbi Tarfon, it is not your duty to finish the work, but neither are you at liberty to neglect it. In doing the work of Christian-Jewish relations, I have drawn the following conclusions. First, difficulties can stop us. Second, difficulties can divide us. Third, difficulties can make us distrustful, sarcastic, cynical. Fourth, difficulties can help us to better understand each other. Fifth, difficulties can help us to better understand ourselves. Sixth, difficulties can help us to go beyond superficialities. And seven, difficulties can unite us. Jews and Christians can, indeed must, work together and at the same time keep and foster our distinct identities. Thank you again for recognizing my work. Thank you for the important work that all of you, the ICCJ, the University of Salzburg, and the other institutions and individuals do. Thank you for modeling high scholarly and pastoral work, perseverance, hospitality, and friendship.
I'd like to welcome Yona back to the front of the auditorium to present a powerful and moving piece by the eminent Jewish American composer Judith Lang-Zymont called My Heart Within Me is Desolate. It's a powerful and tragic musical response to a really deep and heartfelt psalm, Psalm 143, the beginning of which reads, "Hear my prayer, O Lord, give ear to my supplications. In thy faithfulness answer me, and in thy righteousness enter not into judgment with thy servant, for in thy sight no man living shall be justified. For the enemy has persecuted my soul. He hath smitten my life down to the ground. He hath made me to dwell in darkness as those that have been long dead." And the verse which inspired Judith to write this piece, the fourth verse, "Therefore is my spirit overwhelmed within me, my heart within me is desolate."
One of the great gifts of my vocational development happened roughly 25 years ago, and that was the opportunity to hear the legendary preacher and social activist, the Reverend William Sloane Coffin, speak in New York City at B'nai Jeshurun Synagogue in honor of one of his mentors, the late, great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be for a blessing. I had the youthful chutzpah to go and seek out Bill after he spoke. And he said many things. He was a gifted orator, as some of you may know. And at one point, as I was anxiously and excitedly asking him questions about theology and praxis and justice and righteousness, he said to me, "Or I want you to remember the following thing. There are, at this point, too many young fogies and old Turks." So here we are, folks. This is the Next Generation panel. We all stand on the shoulders of giants, even the ones that are quiet and humble, but those that have done so much small but great work. And we wanted here to extend the conversation across the generations, and we have three remarkable people, each in their own right, to respond in some way, shape, or form to Dr. Seever's remarks, his intellectual and spiritual autobiography. So I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, your names, of course, and titles that are in the program, but say a word about who you are, picking up on AJ's theme before of titles and accomplishments and Menschlichkeit, and then share what comes from head and heart based on the piece that we all just heard. Dr. Stephanie Edwards.
Yes, only honorifics. Hi, all. My name is Dr. Stephanie Edwards. I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Theological Interreligious Consortium, better known in the Boston area as the BTI. I come to you here from the Roman Catholic tradition and also need to speak closer to the mic and also turn it on. How about that? But all that mishigas is in your folder in front of you. I'd like to do exactly what Rabbi Rose just asked us to do, which is reflect a little bit on what Dr. Seever's wonderful life and his reflections brought up for me. So apologies for any of my actual ancient or modern Greek speakers in the room. I'm going to mispronounce this. Diakonia, as Dr. Seevers mentions, is the responsible service of the gospel by deeds and by words performed by Christians in response to the needs of the people. Of course, in my tradition, modeled on the life and works of Jesus Christ. It is also the way that I myself found my way into the Catholic Church and my own faith. Raised in a secular humanist home, I arrived for undergraduate studies at Santa Clara University in California, not having a clue what a Jesuit was, let alone understanding that I was undertaking a Catholic education. But I did really love their motto, men and women for others. I could grab onto that. It was there that I heard another phrase tied to what would become the ground of my faith and my life's work. It matters who you put yourself in the way of. It matters who you put yourself in the way of. Not in the sense of conflict or impasse or argumentation, but rather it matters who you sit with. It matters who you choose to be in family with. It matters who you choose to call your own. And I wanted to know the truth of these phrases, as many of us young bucks do. And so I said, hey, I'm gonna go out and test y'all. And I decided to study abroad with the Jesuits in El Salvador. I decided to do a year in post-Katrina New Orleans as a Jesuit volunteer. And a social work career came after that, a theology doctorate. ended up owning up to the fact that I'd been Catholic for a while and converting, and then truly trying to find my way into what it meant to embody all that I had seen, done, and lived. And now I'm here with all of you. I don't have any answers, but what stands out for me is similar to Dr. Seever's reflections. I am led in my life and my work by friendship. It's modeled of a friend that is vulnerable, is sometimes quiet, is sometimes loud, but is of service to me and I in service to them. It has deeply mattered who I have put myself in the way of, to whom I have been of service, but it's been even more important to me who has held that space with me and who has generously chosen to stay in that space with me. It's even more important to hold that generosity, to hold that in-between space. That sense of mutuality, of relationship, is at the root of diaconia for me, of service to all our needs and my own as a hurting and hesitantly hopeful world.
Good evening. My name is Rabbi Batia Illinois. Oh, can you all hear me okay? Yes, better? Okay, great. A little closer. Is this better now? Better? Wonderful. My name is Rabbi Batia Illinois. I am a very proud and grateful ordainee of Hebrew College. I've also worked with the Miller Center for a number of years, and my work revolves around my passions of integrating Jewish wisdom and spirituality with healing from trauma and creation of wellness. I was particularly moved to hear Dr. Seever's account of the memorable and spontaneous interreligious prayer service when a Jewish colleague was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It led me to recall my own unforgettable memory of an interfaith vigil for the victims of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh that was held in Boston Common the day after the shooting in late October of 2018. I was a second-year rabbinical student at the time, certainly in shock that something of that horrific caliber had just happened. At the vigil, I stood alongside hundreds of people from the Boston Jewish community and beyond, receiving words of support and solidarity from state and local leaders of various faiths, including the Protestant Massachusetts governor, the Catholic Boston mayor, a cardinal, an imam, and my beloved teacher, Rabbi and president of Hebrew College, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Annisfeld, amongst others. Especially moving to me were words of support from Sheikh Yassir Fahmy, in which he professed his love to the Jewish community as a Muslim. His parting message to us as his Jewish brothers and sisters: today, wear your yarmulke a bit tighter. Don't let anyone tell you to fear your faith, to fear being a Jew. And we are with you. Millions of Muslims across the world are with you. His love and words of encouragement, of which that was just a small snippet, along with the expressions of solidarity from the other speakers, touched me to my core. I realized that that vigil was not only for the immediate victims of the tragedy, but also for my personal terrified heart and spirit, and the collective wounded Jewish hearts and spirits of past, present, and future. This vigil's impact truly transcended time in that way. For the first time in my life, I knew and trusted that we as Jews were not alone as we may have experienced in the past. This experience gifted me with a new dimension of spiritual depth, a new dimension of spiritual strength and resilience. It healed parts of me that I didn't even know needed healing, that rippled through time and space. I give profound thanks to the source of life and to all of the humans who've been engaged in the work of relationship building to enable that vigil and those words that were spoken to even be possible. That vigil was an example of what it looks like to be a blessing for one another and for the world. May we continue to embody these blessings of connection, of healing encounters of unity and of love. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Reverend Kenneth Young. I am the Associate Director of Massachusetts Council of Churches, also a PhD student in leadership, and I'm glad to be here on this evening. Massachusetts Council of Churches serve 18 different denominations in Massachusetts. We know passing every town and city in this Commonwealth, and so we're excited to be here. I'm excited to be here. In particular, I would like to say that I am coming from a Black church tradition background, and I wanted to interact with Dr. Seever's work. Dr. Seaver suggests towards the end of his talk on this evening in his 7 difficulties in Christian-Jewish relationships. I want to focus on the last one when he talks about difficulties can unite us. Difficulties can unite us. I serve as a pastor in a historic Black Baptist church in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is about 20 miles or so north of Boston. Upon my installation service, which is a huge event in the Black church, new pastors coming in, a new leader, pastors and leaders from all over attend this installation service. I was connected with Cantor Vera Brookhusen. She reached out to me. I said that again. I was new, and she reached out to me. We met at a local coffee shop in Haverhill, Massachusetts. We began to have a dialogue and explain backgrounds. Being born and raised in Georgia, our communities did not intersect. It was a great way to break bread together and to learn from one another. As an HBCU alum, that's a historically Black college university, the narrative of Exodus has been used in the Black church to uplift Black communities. God will free us from the bondage of slavery. This was our conversation starter. So I asked the question, do you know that the Exodus narrative is vital to Black theology? I would dare say Black liberation theology. And how does that make you feel? We spent about an hour or so just talking and chatting about the importance of Exodus. The initial conversation began to unite a Black Baptist and a Jew because we were able to find common ground. I have worked closely with Cantor Vera. We have worked to plan our annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Shabbat service. We have discussed hard conversations about the cross and what does that mean. Black worship and expressions of praise during a worship service. We've learned to respect cultural differences and religious beliefs. We learned to welcome unity for flourishing of all God's people. Cantor Vera and I have embraced each other as humans and supported one another through communications, through different inflection moments, such as the Tree of Life, such as words that were said by a famous NBA player like Kyrie Irving. We've had several conversations of what does that mean for your community? When George Floyd happened, she called me. How are you doing? And how are your people? Is it anything that we can do from Temple Emmanuel? We protested together. We worked through COVID-19 together by hosting a joint clinic. We've uplifted one another through conversations because we believe that finding the common ground for unity is the central focus of our friendship. Thank you.
I have the words of 2 pioneers in this field, Sarah Lee and Mary Boyce, in my mind and in my heart. And both of these tremendously thoughtful and impassioned educators point out in a book that they wrote together that 3 people sitting on a stage is not a dialogue. 3 people speaking seriatim is still not a dialogue. And so I asked each of you not only to prepare words in response to Dr. Seever's remarks, but also to ask each other a question briefly as the hour is late, but so that you help all of us begin to feel more comfortable engaging in conversation over the coming days. Stephanie.
So I'm going to make you talk again, Kenneth.
Okay.
So I have the gift of teaching undergraduates at Boston College as well as my full-time job, because who needs just one job? But something that comes up a lot when we do talk about Exodus is sometimes a too easy familiarity with the narrative, if that makes any sense. Like, oh, I get it. Slavery to liberation to God's promise. 19-year-olds believe they have it wrapped at that point. I would love if you would talk a little bit more about the complexity of how you and Cantor Vera engaged with the narrative of Exodus, or anything that might have surprised you in your conversations about that central text to both of you.
Yes, so I would say in our conversation, it was this thought of what does it mean to be held captive or be in bondage? And going down the narrative of slave chattel here in America, and to be black, and wondering if God is actually hearing our cry and hearing our call. And so we had dialogue about that, and then this sense of understanding that God sends a Moses, right? And what does that mean for you as a Jew? And I can tell you what it means for me. We've had several different people that we've deemed in our community to be Moses, such as Harriet Tubman, who was called Moses and led several people to be free. And I would also say that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King would be also called a type of Moses. And I would also say that even in this day, I think we are still trying to figure out what freedom looks like, what does it feel like, and how do we experience it as a community? And looking through the lens of Exodus gives hope to the sense that God is not unavailable, but he hears and he will send help. God will send help.
All right. Question for you, Stephanie. Yes. When did someone show you such grace or compassion that you spoke of? Or when did you see a group of students act in such a way?
Sure. My most memorable offer of standing with me was during my Jesuit volunteer year in New Orleans. So I showed up in New Orleans about a year and a half after Katrina. We were the first group allowed back into the Jesuit house there as non-clergy people. And we were just going blithely about our tasks, as you do when you're young and given one to do. And we get a knock on the door one day, this house of 4 white women from far outside of the South, me from the West Coast and 3 from the Midwest. And a wonderful old auntie is standing on the steps and just starts preaching to us, I would say. And her topic of her sermon was, y'all can't just come down here and take over the city. And we were like, oh no, we are not trying to do that. We're trying to help in our innocence. And instead of simply leaving in anger or calling us out and feeling somehow satisfied, she invited us to her church and said, in the basement of the church, me and a bunch of the older African-American women in this neighborhood are starting an anti-racism working group, and you're gonna go. And it's every Wednesday night, and it's 4 hours, so buckle in, because we're Baptists. And I was like, oh, okay. And they would not give up on us. They were tenacious. They really understood that we did not know and wanted us to so deeply know. And I think that in that year of service would have looked nothing like it ended up looking without their commitment intergenerationally, cross-racially, cross-religiously, to be there with us and learn with us and teach us throughout that year. So I think that that's the one that has changed me the most, and something that while I'm still involved in that volunteer program as a mentor, I try to model and encourage my students to sit in because it was a rare gift. I don't think people are often that willing to be that generous. And yeah, I think that was it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so Rabbi Illinois, how have you attempted to share, the type of experience that you talked with us through today with others in your work as an interreligious educator and rabbi?
So I'd say initially that experience at that vigil was so powerful that I felt like I went from feeling a sense of helplessness and how am I ever gonna get over this kind of thing to such empowerment. Like I felt like there were hands on my back. And I came back to school the next day and I knew we were gonna be doing something in community time and I said, I want to be a part. I have capacity to be a part of facilitating or holding space for this. So that was immediate. And I know that I shared it with other Jewish friends and I may have shared it with my family, but until I was preparing for these remarks last week, I had actually forgotten about this experience. I think it was such a formative experience that it's just been integrated. And so I'm grateful for this actually being the first time that I'm able to share it in such a forum and for the memory to come back. And I also have no doubt that it is inextricably linked with how I show up as an educator, as a human, as a rabbi. That is such a, I feel this I don't know if this is hyperbolic or if it's real. I feel like it changed my DNA.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you for your thoughtful remarks and for engaging one another in addition to our honoree. And I just want to say a thank you to so many people in the room who are of previous generations, who had to find their way into this work long before there were programs for students and for emerging leaders like these. So this is a moment of bracha, of great blessing. So keep on keeping on.
Thank you.
Now, for our closing meditation, I'd like to call up Rav Claudia Kreiman of the Senior Rabbi of Temple Beth Zion in Brookline. And after that, I'll give some departing instructions.
I just want to put up video or something here. I'm really honored to be here offering this final meditation to the opening of this very, very important conference. And I'm so grateful to my dear friend, Rabbi Oroz, for inviting me. I did not realize, actually, when Ori invited me, how meaningful this would be personally for me in this day, Father's Day. As my father, Rabbi Angel Kreiman, Zichrono Livracha, may his memory be a blessing, was actually in the executive board of the ICCJ before he passed. And I did not put those two dots together when you invited me or until this morning. And he was incredibly active in the work of interfaith, interreligious work in Chile and Argentina, especially in Chile with the Catholic Church during the dictatorship, being one of the founders with Arzobispo of the Confraternidad Judeo-Cristiana, the Confraternity of Jews and Christians in Santiago, Chile. So it's feel personal, especially on Father's Day, I feel I'm channeling a little bit of my dad. There are very few things that my dad and I shared in our rabbinate. The interfaith work is one of them. Negotiating or navigating multiple identities is actually my daily story and practice. I am a Jew, I'm a Latina, I'm Ashkenazi. People don't get that you can be Latina and Ashkenazi. I am Chilena, Chilean, I'm Argentina, Argentinian. I'm also Israeli. I also became an US citizen, so I'm an American rabbi. I'm an immigrant. I'm all of those. I'm also a woman, a mother, a rabbi. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter, the daughter of my father I just mentioned. I'm the daughter of a victim of terrorist attack and hatred done in the name of religion, an anti-Semitic act of attack in Argentina. My mother was killed in bombing in Buenos Aires. I'm all of that. Those identities, all of them are me, is me. But it's not many identities. It's one. I embody all of it. It's not I am this one moment and the other thing another moment. I'm all of it. And that's true for all of us. All of our journeys, all of our identities are one because we are part of the one. That's what brings us here together. Though lately I found a word that when someone asks me, what are you, I use most. It's the word Jewtina. I am a Jewtina. This is a word not coined by me. It was coined by Ana Lucia Lopez Reboredo, who is a scholar in Jewish and Latin American migration. And I tell Ana Lucia all the time, thank you, I found my word. So each and every one of us brings so much into this world, and we are reminded that we are created in the image of the divine. At Shabbat services every Saturday morning at my temple, Temple Bet Zion, TBZ in Brookline, I take a moment as we transition from the verse from Psalm 150, Kol Shamate, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, every soul praises you, God. We transition to the words of the prayer book, Nishmat Kol Chai Tevarech et Shimcha, every breath, the breath of every living being will bless you, God. And I remind my community that the word neshama, which means soul, and the word neshima, which means breath, are the same word. And I remind and invite all of us always, every Shabbat, to take a few deep breaths and to connect through our breath to our soul. So I want to invite you to do that. So I invite you to take a moment, if it works for you, to put your feet on the ground, close your eyes, soften your gaze if closing your eyes doesn't work, and become mindful of your breath, breathing in and breathing out, taking a neshima, a mukha, a deep breath. Being reminded that every breath, it is God breathing into you. And as we breathe in and we breathe out, we check in with our neshama. We check in with our soul. How is our soul doing? What does our soul need? And how can our soul, our neshama, show up in the world, bringing the manifestation of God into this world? So I want to conclude by blessing all of us with a priestly blessing, the blessing in the book of Numbers in the Torah that priests offer to their communities, that in the Jewish tradition parents say to their children every Friday night at the Shabbat table. And I'll offer the blessing in English, Hebrew, and Spanish. Yevarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha. Yair Adonai panav elecha, ve'yichuneka is Adonai panav elecha, ve'yasem lecha shalom, ve'yasem lecha shalom. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Veyasem lecha shalom. Que Dios los bendiga y proteja. Que Dios nos ilumine y agracie. Que Dios nos favorezca con una vida de paz, bendición y plenitud. May Adonai bless you and protect you. May Adonai show you kindness and be gracious to you. May Adonai bestow favor upon you and grant you peace. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you so much for those final words of blessing. A few directions for your way out. First, immediately after the opening, there will be the on-site registration will remain open for another 30 minutes if you need to get anything resolved. Second, all attendees are invited to stay for refreshments. You may take the stairs all the way down. There are elevators, but they're small. And finally, dinner will be served for the registered participants. Well, it says here 6:30, but it'll be later. You'll know when it's dinner time. Or please come up here with me. This isn't on the script, but or without us working together and our team, especially Marilyn and Camille, we couldn't make this happen. And with you, I simply want to declare that the conference is now open. Thank you.